Thanks for joining us today at whatthechuck.net. Today's Excel tutorials will be delivered with the latest version of Office 365 as of the date of this video. Thank you and hope you enjoy. Today we're going to be looking at the Vlookup function in Microsoft Excel. If you've never used VLOOK, it's a pretty powerful function that you can use to look up specific data based on something that you type in or something that's already in the existing data set that you're just trying to get a little more bang for your buck. We're going to do a couple different examples today. One of them is going to be a simple address book, and we're going to type in someone's name and we're going to pull their address out of the data. The second thing we're going to do, based on my last training video for pivot tables, I had a larger data set where I used VLOOKUP to kind of do some heavy lifting for me that I could directly incorporate into my pivot table without having to go and manually calculate stuff. So we'll take a look at that second. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to click over here on my address book. I put in some data a little early so that I already have this ready. Basically, it's just some fictitious names and fictitious addresses. And what we're going to do is we're going to use VLOOKUP to type in the person's name here, and in the boxes down below, we're going to have their street address, their city, their state, and their zip pop up for us. So this is a very, very small data set, but you know, if you have 7 rows or 700 rows, it works exactly the same way. But this is a really simple example. So what I'm going to do, this is the first field that we're actually going to look up, and it's going to be the street address. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go up here, and just like any other function, you're going to type the equal sign because you're saying that this cell is equal to, and then we're going to type in VLOOKUP. And you have to spell it correctly. So the first thing that we're looking up are for the function is it's going to look up, it wants a lookup value. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that we're going to look up what we type in this cell here, H3. Now, what that means is we're going to type in Jane Doe or David Lee, and then it's going to go over here in this table and it's going to find their address for us. But we have to enter a few additional arguments. So the first one was where are we, typing this information to look it up. To the separator for each one of your arguments is going to be a comma. So we're going to put a comma. Then the next thing it wants to know is the table array. So where is our data? That's what it's asking us. So all of our data is right here. Okay. Now one thing that I recommend that you do up in the formula bar, if you'll highlight that data range for where your data is and hit the F4 key on your keyboard, you notice it's going to put dollar signs in front of the column and the row number. And what that's going to do is it's going to make this formula, that particular portion of the formula, absolute. So what does that mean? Well, if you pull formulas down a row or you copy and paste formulas all over your sheet, it's going to make this table range consistent. A lot of times if you grab data and fill it down, Excel thinks you want to increment the row number or the column number depending on which way you drag it. And we don't want that to happen in this case. Because we're going to do in a minute is we're going to copy this formula and make a couple of adjustments for the next 3 fields we're going to populate. And if we don't make it absolute, it's going to take us a lot longer because we're going to have to do additional edits or retype the whole formula back in again. So far, we've got the lookup value, we've got the table array, and now we need the column index number. What's a column index number? Well, as you can see, our data is in 5 columns, A, B, C, D, and E, and correspondingly, A typically is equal to 1, the B column would be equal to 2, because this is the first cell that Excel is going to come to, this is the second one, and this is the third one. Well, for this example, I want the second column uh, value in the data, which is the street address. So I'm going to put another comma to separate my arguments, and I'm going to put a number 2. The last thing that we have to do is there's a couple of different ways you can return the data. It can be returned that, hey, I found an approximate match, maybe some of the letters matched David Lee or Jane Doe, or do I want an exact match? And for me, 10 times out of 10, maybe you, 9 times out of 10, we're going to pick exact match. You could do true, which is an approximate match, but you could potentially run the risk of getting extra data in there that you don't want, especially in the example that we're doing right now. So I'm going to double click false. You could just have easily typed in the word false, but my mouse is right there. So I'm going to hit enter, and it says NA with the little error there because we haven't typed anything up here. I'm going to go ahead and type in Jane Doe. So if you look, we've typed in Jane Doe, and we look over here, and her street address is 234 Elm Street, and that's what it pulled up over here. So let's go a little further. Let's take this, the street address that we looked up, and let's copy this formula. And it's always better in this particular scenario is if you copy it from the formula bar instead of just clicking here and hitting Control C. So I've highlighted it and selected it. I'm going to hit copy, and then I'm going to come down here, highlight it, copy it, and then just get off of it. And then we're going to go down here to the next cell where we want the city, and we're going to paste the formula for the city, but we're still, if I hit that, I'm still going to see the address. Well, that's because we've got to go over here and tell it we want the third column instead of the second. All right, so we've got 234 Elm Street in Birmingham. So let's do the same thing. Let's copy this. And let's go over here where we want the state. And we're going to make that 3 a 4 because we want the fourth column, which is the state. And then finally, we're going to put in the 5 for the fifth column, which is the zip code. So now I can come up here and I can say, David Lee, there's his address. John Smith, here's his address. Now, that's pretty quick and easy, but if you've got 50, 60 names in this list, you might want a little bit of data validation because you don't want to type in something and misspell it. If I typed in, I'm not going to find anything because I spelled his name wrong. So one of the things that I like to do is if you go over to the data tab on your ribbon and go to data validation and then choose data validation, you can create a drop-down list. And what we'll do under the settings tab, we're going to choose list is what we're going to allow. And under the source, this wants to know where our list is. We're going to highlight all the names in the list. And then we're going to click OK. So now you can click this little drop down, select whoever you want to look at, and there you go. It's pretty simple. So the next thing I want to do, I want to go back over to the original data set that I used for my pivot table demonstration. And one of the ways I used VLOOKUP in this example was I needed to know, and let me back up just a little bit. This data is based on training that was sold and then scheduled to be delivered, and I was tracking, what type of training it was, how much it cost, the name of the trainer, when it was delivered, its current status, and things like that. So if I were doing a pivot table, say over here, and I was trying to figure out how much revenue I was making from the sale, how much of it was profit, how much of it did I have to pay the trainer, I was using the Vlookup function to determine, based on a percentage rate that the trainer got for each event, how much money did I owe them out of the total cost of the training. And over here, I had a little table that said, for the events that David Lee does, he gets 25% of that revenue. Jane Doe gets 25% of the revenue. And in fact, all of them do, with the exception of Ralph Stone, who gets 30. Now, if they all got the same amount of revenue percentage, I could have just, typed in 25% all the way down. But I wanted to do this live so that the formula, the VLOOKUP formula, could do the work for me. Now, as I mentioned in the previous video, the spreadsheets and data sets that I typically work with were anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 lines long, and you just can't do that manually. So, with that being said, I use VLOOK in the same fashion. I basically said that the data that I was going to look up from was in L2. That's the trainer's name. And then my data array was over here in these two columns. Your trainer names were on the left and their percentages were on the right. And then I entered the number 2 because it's the second column and pressed enter. And one thing I didn't do, probably should put the exact match in there. It didn't affect my results, but it's better to put it in there. And then what I did with that was I just came over here, and if you see the little dot, the period in the bottom right hand corner of that cell, if you double click that, it's going to fill that formula all the way down. And you can see that the only number that changes is where it's looking for the data that it's looking up. Right now it says L20, and if I go down, it's 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. But you'll notice these other numbers, they don't move. And that's because when we put them in, we hit the F4 key and cause that range of data to be absolute. If we hadn't put those dollar signs in front of it using the F4, it would be doing the exact same thing that L25 is doing. Which is incrementing if you're going down, or the opposite if you're going up. And our formula would not work correctly. So always remember that. All right, so I think we've covered the VLOOKUP function. I hope it made sense. I hope I didn't ramble too much for you. But we'll be producing some other videos and getting those out there for some other functions and more tutorials as we get them done. Thanks, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's video from whatthechuck.net. If you did like it and you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification, and you'll get notified whenever we release new videos in the future. Thank you, guys.